Can you see me?
I can, and it's a beautiful sight as always. Mike, how are you?
Great to be here, man.
Mike, it is. I just I tell you this every time, but this is the first time we've ever done an interview this way. But you were the first interview we ever did on this show 10 years ago. It's come full circle. Here we are, and it's great to see you, my friend.
You're still standing.
I
Great
st-
to
well, so, yeah, here and there, depending on
make both of us.
you're right. Yeah, I know. Well, this is just great to see because actually, Mike, you're going to be here. I'm in Missouri. You're going to be in High Ridge, Missouri on May 21st, which is a suburb of St. Louis. So look forward to seeing you there. You're getting ready to hit the road for the Songs of White Lion tour coming up this spring in the U.S. Got to be an exciting time for you.
I'm just happy to be alive and being able to play the songs that I've written, and continue on this ever going trek.
It has been, it's been a ride, and this is different though, because when we first, I think, had you on, you were in the middle of a solo album that you just released, and you were literally driving around the country by yourself. And that's how we did our first interview. You were literally in the car driving to your next location. So,
And nothing has changed.
and nothing has
Nothing has
changed.
changed. It'll be the same thing, except for this time I'm doing this May tour together with Marcus Nan, the guitar
Right.
player who's of the album. So it's the same thing. And it's the only way to do it, to cover that many shows. I don't know if anyone really looked out there, but if you go in and look at some of those bands, there are no bands that are really touring. Some bands are playing one show there and then they fly out doing this. And I'm doing 22 shows in 30 days. And it's like, it's it's speechless.
Well, can't wait to see it. You talk about Marcus Nand and just talk about your kind of relationship with him, because his guitar playing is so important on the album Mike Tramp Songs of White Lion. It's out April 14th. I have had such a pleasurable time going through and enjoying these songs and the way you've re-recorded them. Just talk about the importance of him, because he nails so many of the very important Vito Bratta solos, and I think that his work on this album is impeccable.
Yeah, well, I'm happy that you're putting it out that way, nail, because it's basically what it comes down to. Um, I have said this in other interviews that I hadn't planned to do this kind of thing. Like I say, I have 13 solo albums, and I've continued that way, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing was, every step that I take outside my home, somebody slaps a White Lion sticker on my back. Every poster says the voice of White Lion, or the guy with the tight ass from White Lion with the great looking hair, or whatever they choose to put on, nothing to do with the music. And the thing is, I'm also not 27 as I was in 1988. I'm 62 years old, and a lot of things have changed, including the voice. So for me to do this the proper way, and for something that I could embrace and doing with conviction and confidence and also sound good, I had to find a way to work these songs out in a different key. And you mentioned before the great Vito Bratta, which of course I wrote the songs together with. His guitar playing is extremely unique, much more unique than a lot of other guitar players. And when you play White Lion and you have to play it Vito Bratta note for note, most step off the bus, and go home. So I had asked Marcus, I played with Marcus already back in 95. And we've been great friends since, and worked our way up to one day playing together. I says, listen, take this homework and let me know if this can be done. And he came back, a while later, says, I think I can manage to play his guitar parts in a different key. And that was the make and break of me doing it or not doing it, because there would be no point of me going out there and doing songs of White Line and making it sound different. It's obviously 2023 and not 1986. So the whole sound picture is different. You know, the voice of Mike Tramp is different, but when you look into it, you know it is the same thing. It's just 35 years later.
Absolutely. And when you're putting together the songs that you want to do for this album, was that a difficult thing? Because obviously you've got certain amount of White Lion hits that you know have got to be there. You got a Little Fighter and When the Children Cry and Hungry and songs like that. But you know, there's songs that you know, you got like Love Don't Come Easy is on this album, which is a tremendous version. Was this hard to put together the song list for this, or was it kind of obvious as you were doing it?
Well, I kind of like imagine Deep Purple in the dressing room and then somebody going, "Are we going to play Smoke on the Water?"
Well,
and so, and you know what? I was fortunate enough, together with White Line, to 2 or 3 months with AC/DC, and Angus. One of the few things he said when we met him once, he says, you know, it's when we were asking about why you only playing one song from the new album. And that's classic AC/DC. They've done that on every tour. He says, it's great to go into the studio and record new songs and fresh stuff like that. But when you walk out on stage, people want to hear the classics. And this album is a concert poster.
yeah.
It has to do with the live show and stuff like that. When you look at the album cover, it says Mike Tramp Songs of White Line. You're no doubt what this is about. So obviously, you mentioned the key songs, which has to be there. And I'm also pleased that you mentioned songs like Love Don't Come Easy.
Yeah.
And revisiting that song, which came out at the end of White Line when almost the 80s had gone.
Mm-hmm.
Vito and I always felt that song coming in 1988, 89, would have been a massive song, et cetera, et cetera. We came 2 years too late, et cetera, et cetera. And then also going in and picking up All the Fallen Men from our first album, Fight to Survive, 1984. Yep. And there's a little more to the story, which I'm sure the listeners want to hear, is that, you know, the Pride album is our live show that we played for 2 years in the clubs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that classic story of a band having their entire life, you know, to write the first album and 2 weeks to write the follow-up. And that became the true story of the Big Game album. We'd been on the road for almost 2 years with the Pride album. And then suddenly a record company says, "Oh, we got a new music, we get a new album," stuff like that. Vito and I wrote the Big Game album in 2 weeks.
Incredible.
And we never had the time to play around with it in the rehearsal room. You know, I mean, Wade was rewritten 10 times and et cetera, before we even got into the studio over the many years and stuff like that. So going back and picking up Little Fighter, Living on the Edge, Going Home Tonight, and Cry for Freedom was very important for me to have those songs with, you know, to give them almost, without taking anything away from original White Line, the final touch on what made these songs complete.
Well, there's a beautiful, you've done When the Children Cry in different ways that
times.
you did a great version, acoustic version on a solo album that you did about 9 years ago. Yeah. And then this one features a beautiful piano intro. So where does that come from? Was that something that you wrote, you and Marcus kind of came up with? What was the...
No. I mean, actually, no, I mean, of all songs, When the Children Cry can't really be changed. And the original version of the Pride album is just Vito and I. Vito played the acoustic guitar and then the guitar solo, and I sing. So for me to go in and doing that, note for note or exactly the same. They didn't make any sense. So I thought it would be a nice touch to just add the piano instead of the acoustic guitar as the final song, and the song has the song was written in 1985 and is really a song about 2023. What have we become? Look at what we have done. No more
Wow.
presidents and all the wars will end. I mean, what can I say?
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. And we've had conversations to that end. And without getting too, crazy deep into it, this is about the music and about this tour and this album. But you are someone that has a very interesting takes on things, and I appreciate that about you. But especially when you take a song like "Cry for Freedom," I look to those kind of songs, especially in the last 3 years when I was crying for freedom personally, when I felt like I had lost it for a couple of years here, Mike. So those songs come back and they have meaning 35 years later that maybe we didn't realize it would happen. It's kind of strange how that works out.
Yeah, it's just you didn't plan it that way. It's just but when a song stands the test of time, that is the true platinum award on the wall.
Yeah, that's so true. And that's exactly what this has become. Mike, I've always found it interesting because you and the songs of White Lion are such a part of the lexicon of rock and roll, especially from a certain time period of the 80s. But all these other bands, it seems like they go out and they do these big packages, and of course you're going to be playing M3 with a lot of your peers, but for the most part, Mike, you kind of keep to yourself and do these shows on your own. Is there a reason for that? Are you just kind of someone that likes to stay on your own, or do you have a lot of friends still from a lot of these bands, or kind of what's the deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I would think that I would be on good terms with most people that I personally have met and played with and met backstage at a show or stuff like that. I'm pretty fair person. I'm pretty straightforward and stuff like that. I don't really leave anything behind. That there'll always be somebody out there saying, "Oh, Mike Tramp is an asshole." There'll probably somebody who didn't meet me, but that's a different story. Um, I also don't live in the US anymore. I left the US in 2000 and moved to Australia at that time. And since then it's been going around the world 5 times, and I'm still trying to find a place to drop my anchor and things like that. But um the thing is, nothing has, it's not like I've been presented with, a smaller version of the Motley Crue Def Leppard Stadium tour, So, and I said it to someone else. I mean, the way I tour, which will be in May, where I'm doing like 22 shows in the month of May.
Yeah.
There are no bands out there from my time, sort of like that's not playing the big stages anymore. Most bands are going out, then they're playing a casino and then flying back, and then nobody wants to dig into the trenches anymore.
Yeah.
And the thing is that I come sort of from the streets, and I would love to play Madison Square Garden, but I'm not. So I play the hotspot in in Missouri.
Yes.
And the thing is, I have a lot of friends that are waiting for me, and it'll be like a family reunion in many of the places that I go around, and it's okay.
It's more than okay, and it's appreciated. I want you to know that, because these songs are meaningful and what you've done is extremely meaningful. I'm so glad that you've done this album, because, and for another reason for this, I feel like that Stephen Piercy, like back for the 2008 movie The Wrestler, re-recorded like I'm Insane and Round and Round for that soundtrack. Publishing is such a big part of that, and to have a version of that, do you feel like that is kind of an advantage here, to be able to re-record and have these songs that you can now use for different publishing deals, or is that not something you really think about?
Well, along the road, you start selling off your furnitures and your car and, stuff like that. Now, the thing is, unfortunate. A lot of people haven't been knocking on my door saying, can we put When the Children Cry in when, Clint Eastwood walks down the road and stuff like that. And,
It's a
things
good
like,
idea.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. I think When the Children Cry could be a phenomenal song as an end of a movie, making the point, and maybe the a cry for freedom, etc., etc. When I play the European festivals here over the summer with the full band and stuff like that, Little Fighter and Cry for Freedom will definitely be going towards, a little bit of talk about the Ukraine war and things like that, and etc. And that's just what I do. It didn't fit in the 80s. People didn't want to hear that kind of stuff, when I open my mouth about it. And it's not that like I'm political, and it's not like I'm Michael Stipe and stuff like that. They made bigger statements and always wanted to turn the award shows into, it's, but with age and stuff like that, I do understand these kind of things. Right now, it's just more about finding the time and the place to just saying, hey, we're with you.
And that's important to have that. I just, from a personal standpoint, Mike, as someone growing up as a kid in Denmark, listening to early rock and roll and embracing it like you did, to have the time period from 1983 to 1991 where things just went crazy and you were here and you were a part of so many big tours and hits and MTV, do you reflect back on that and in such a positive way to know that your life kind of came full circle to just a kid growing up in Denmark to someone that took over the world for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, I mean, we have to remember at times of how great it was to have been part of the 80s. It was a phenomenal time. The vibe was so positive. Everywhere rock and roll went, it was greeted with a smile and open arms. Even some girls lifted up their T-shirt.
What?
I mean, it's just one of those kind of things. But life has its way of moving on. So the 80s decade is really a decade and sort of like, boxed in that way. And I would never have thought that coming to the US in 82 and shortly after starting White Line with Vito and writing the first songs, that 5 years later, we would be playing Madison Square Garden. We would be touring with Ozzy and AC/DC, Aerosmith, et cetera, et cetera. We had, 4 top 40 hits. We had, top album, platinum albums, playing Japan, playing the world, et cetera, et cetera. And all we did was write songs.
Yeah. And it's incredible. And that to look back at the lineage of that, it's so important. I mean, I just feel like that, that you and the things that you've done. I mean, I look back at, I think the very first Rocklahoma, there you are, Mike Tramp's White Lion makes an appearance there. And I think you did like a festival, like Bang Your Head Festival, and there's 70,000 people there. Do you get a rise differently kind of out of these shows that you play, whether it be, like you said, at a smaller club or on stage with thousands of people? Is there a differentiation there? Is it just that you are a person that's just there and it doesn't really matter necessarily the crowd or the audience? How do you see that?
Well, it does matter, and at the same time, it doesn't matter because the show must go on. And actually, the easiest thing to do is go out in front of a massive crowd. You raise your hand, and the crowd go. You try to go in a bar and do that in front of 5 people. You're going to get a different reaction. The show requires something completely different. I am very much at home in an empty place. I've played it many times. So, I go in there with a lot of gratefulness. I go in there with grace. I go in there to complete the evening. And whoever is there is going to get the full package.
This is kind of a interesting question I want to ask you, because
I love interesting questions.
Well, it's okay. Well, I don't want to set it up too much because it's a strange question, because I talked recently with Gavin Rossdale from the band Bush. They came out of England in the 90s, kind of a grunge type band. And Gavin told me, and he did this very humbly, by the way, that record labels didn't want to sign them because he was too good looking. Did you experience any of that in the 80s? I mean, obviously the 80s was such an excessive, flamboyant time. You had good looking frontmen all over the place, but Bret Michaels and John Bon Jovi. But did you have, because you guys were kind of a New York band, you weren't the typical LA Sunset Sleaze band. Did you experience anything like that? You were a very good looking frontman. Like, we just got to get that out of the way. Did you experience anything like that?
Well, yes and no. I'm happy that you also mentioned that, White Line being out of New York. I mean, while Stephen Pearcy and Bret Michaels and the rest of the LA 80s bands were hanging out with just a t-shirt on Sunset Boulevard and checking out the hot looking girls. We were in a cold Brooklyn basement in an industrial area that showed no sign of the 80s,
Right.
and that's where White Line came out of. And even the few clubs that existed, our manager owned the biggest club, L'Amour, in Brooklyn, that had where 80s fans could come. But once they left, there were almost no trace of 80s vibe in New York, unless it was at the concert and a little surrounding and stuff like that. When you came to LA, people were walking down the street in that vibe. But I didn't notice it in of course, in White Lion got signs and stuff like that. But after White Lion, I knew that none of the labels that I had another band called Freak of Nature right after White Line, and we did a bigger sort of like a showcase in front of a lot of labels. And I think maybe a lot of them just sort of showed up for curiosity, but based upon that I had been the one with my face on MTV with the big hair and the tight pants and looking, the way I looked, they just knew that was not material for what the 90s was going to be, no matter what.
That makes complete sense. And then maybe Gavin suffered from that as well, as he came from the 90s, and they were
well,
like,
I mean, there are always those kind of things. But then once they sign the band, they will do everything to push whatever good parts the band has. So the record company always ends up being completely two-faced about this. I never seen a record label go hunting for the most ugliest band in the world.
They found them. It's called Twisted Sister. They have since retired, and it's we love
Deep's
we love
a good
you, D.
friend of mine.
I love D. Absolutely. What does it say about these songs, this era, that you still to this day, and you're going to be there, I think, May the 3rd, May the 5th, at the Columbia, Maryland, at the M3 Rock Festival. The fact that there's festivals like this that still exist, and that people absolutely flock from around the country to attend, and that so many of your peers are there playing these kind of festivals, that says to me so much about what was, in my opinion, my favorite era of music, the 80s. What does that say when you go and then there's still 15,000 people that show up to these festivals?
Well, I mean, it says that a lot of people didn't move on.
That's a good thing, though.
No, I mean, it says the same thing that says when people show up for a Star Trek convention, that it had an impact on your life, and you're not willing to let go of it, even though now you're 55 years old and you're showing up as Spock, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, whoever said that music had like a run out date or things like that, expiration date. That's what I was looking. Rock and roll is not like milk. You don't throw it out. It's just, what I will say to this, because it's the same issue around the world. And for a period that were like 20,000 radio shows around America that had added hair to the title of the show. Hair today, hair tomorrow, hair of House of Hair, etc., etc. And the 80s became like something to make fun of it, but nobody was making fun of the 80s. When when the 80s were happening, everybody was taking advantage. Everybody was like wanting to be in company of the 80s when it happened. And no doubt, just like it is with a high school picture and a high school yearbook, looking back 40 years later, yeah, you look different. No doubt, you look different, etc., etc. And the 80s rock and roll went extreme. No doubt about it. But the business called for that. MTV was screaming loud, give us more, give us more. So we didn't say, well, in our next videos, we're going to part our hair and we're going to wear corduroy pants and stuff like that. No, we went full power, doubled up. It went to 11.
Mike, absolutely did. I love your take on things, and I always enjoy catching up. Again, I want to make sure everybody is aware that the album, Mike Tramp, Songs of White Lion, it is out April the 14th. So via Frontiers Music, which is a fantastic record label, by the way. And they put out so much quality material that it's hard to keep up sometimes. I discover new bands. I find artists that I loved from years ago that are releasing material. Frontiers is a good relationship to have, is it not?
Yeah, it's a retirement home for 80 rock and rollers.
And the launching ground for many artists that have.
No, I mean, there is, I say that with a big smile, but
Right.
there is a label that loves the music. First of all, love the music, and that's became sort of like the foundation of the label, starting up, and then concentrating on bands that had that sound and almost don't have a home anywhere else. And with years and with decades, they have become almost the only label in the world that's specializing, passionate about what 80s rock and roll represented.
No question. And I am so grateful for it. And I'm so grateful for this. You can even get it in a CD or a limited edition 2 LP gatefold, which is amazing. Mike, I will see you May 21st here in High Ridge, Missouri. I can't thank you enough for 10 years of being on this show, helping us grow, because in the beginning, I just wanted to interview the artists that I loved and to connect with them in any way that I could. So 10 years, you become a friend. I can't thank you enough, and just continued success, my friend. Really, it's been an honor.
Hey, man, thanks. Build it, and they will come. I mean, we're all part of rock and roll, and we need to stand together, man. They want to rip us apart. They want to say, it's passé and stuff like that. But the thing is that when you walk out on stage, regardless if it's a little bar or you're lucky enough to play a festival, you look at the audience, and most of them smile back, which means they're having a good time. They're going down memory lane, et cetera, et cetera. You might even see a man and a woman stand together, and then after the show, you meet them and say, we met at a White Lion concert, and we're still here. I mean, after all, that's got to mean something.
It means everything, and that's what rock and roll is all about, Mike. Thank you so much again, and we'll see you here next month. Appreciate it, man. See you soon.
You got it.
Thanks, bud.